Hello everyone, thank you very much for joining this live, and today we discuss a question. We actually tried to practically answer a question that I got a few weeks ago, but due to my vacation I couldn't answer it faster. It's about having roles and authorities for an application both at the same time for an application and store them in a database. So someone actually asked me if it's possible and how to implement a way in which you would have both roles and authorities for user and also store them in a database. So is that possible? The answer is technically yes. Practically, I'm not sure if architecturally speaking it's a good decision to have both of them, because in my perspective it might create confusion. You know, guys, if you followed also my other streams, you might know that I prefer simplicity over everything. So I do advise, if possible, keep only either authorities or roles, and try not to mix them together, because they might create over engineering in your application. They might create confusion. They might create an app that is more difficult to understand overall. So that's basically why I don't recommend having them both. But at the same time, if you followed my other lessons, and I do recommend you follow them, because today I will not explain in detail everything. I will skip over a lot of things, but that's just because I expect that you guys who are watching now this video, you already have some knowledge about Spring Security. And if you don't have it, then my recommendation is you go back to the Spring Security Fundamentals playlist, which is free on this channel. You can watch it as many times as you want. You can ask questions in the comment section and so on. And make sure you have that information before you follow this video, so you can properly understand it. Okay, so in the end, as you have possibly seen, and you possibly know already, both roles and authorities, they are different only as a concept, but technically they are both represented by the granted authority interface. So there is no different contract in Spring Security for authority versus role. Authorities and roles are both represented by the same interface, the same contract in Spring Security, which is called granted authority. It's only a contract that has one method, which is get name, and so the only thing that an authority and a role has is their name. You can call a role admin or manager or client, or usually the role is a badge. And usually when you use roles, you have badges that you apply to users, and based on the badge they have, they can do certain actions. While authorities, they are the actions that they can use. So you would use authorities if you want to have an action based authorization rules rather than badged based authorization rules. So that's why, as I said earlier, mixing them together is technically possible. And I wouldn't say, I would say not even difficult, but from an application perspective, it might create unnecessary complexity, and you might want to be careful with that. Okay, so let me try to implement it. Database to app configuration, where we will use both roles and authorities at the same time. So for that we will need to add a few tables. You already can see my screen. I will create a users table, a very simple one. For the matter of simplicity, I will add the password in plain text in the database, but you know that in a real world application you should always use a hashing algorithm like bcrypt, for example, whenever you store the password. So today, only to make our implementation make the best use of our time, I will not encrypt it. But I would never do something like this in a real world application. Mind that always passwords and secrets need to be kept safe, and passwords always need to be hashed whenever stored and kept either temporary or permanently somewhere. So username, password, varchars, ID, I added an auto increment there, although I don't think I need it at all today. I will save this table and then I will add a few records. So I will just add a couple of records myself, my users Bill and John that I usually use in any demonstration. So let's add the couple of users here, Bill and John. 1 2 3 4 5 is their password here and there. Again, never kept it in plain text in a real world app. And then we have I will just create a separate table here, authorities, and then the authorities table, I can actually make it have, of course, the authority name, and then I can have something like is authority or role, something like that. So I can have a role which can be a tiny int, I think it's tiny int, and that will be mapped to a boolean in my application. So that would be either it's a role or an authority, and the default can be 0 here. I think I can add a default 0 like this. So this is my case, and then what I can do is having the users underscore authorities table, which is a many-to-many relationship, as you can see. Then I will have user ID, and I would have authority ID, both of them ints. There's no primary key since it's only a join table, so that's it. And then in the authorities table, I can add a few records here as well. I can say name read, this is definitely an authority. Name write, this is definitely an authority. So you see it's an action. When it's an action, it's an authority. And then you have admin, it looks like a badge, so it should be a role. And you have client, it looks like a badge, so it should be a role, and so on and so forth. So yeah, you can have something like this, but what does that mean? So you need to have, if you do something like this in a real world application, you need to have a very clear understanding on what are you actually doing there, because usually you either use role based or action based. So in the end they will map at the same contract in Spring Security, but the concept will be that you will either make someone admin or only give them permission to read or something like that, or maybe they will have a client and they will also have permission to write, which can be different from something, and based on how you will apply the authorization rules, it will look differently. So yeah, that's how it would look like, although for me it's a little bit tricky. I'm not sure if I would find it easy. So fine enough, it doesn't have a primary key, so I have to insert it by hand. Insert into users authorities values, and then I can give some like client 1, authority 1. Let me see if it works without specifying the database name. It worked. Something like this, just to be sure it worked. I'm going to select them. Yeah, it worked. So user, let's say user 1, and then the authorities I already forgot. Okay. Yeah, the role in front is not needed in the database, isn't it? So I only need to write here admin and client, because I can map it to whatever I want then when I get it in Spring Security. So don't worry that I didn't use the role underscore in front, because I will map it when I get into the application. Okay. Now I'm going back. So John has the read authority, and then John has also the write authority. Let's say something like that. And then I would say Bill has the read authority, but also the client role, something like that. Client role. And then I check that everything works fine. Okay, so that should be it. Now I will close everything here. Hopefully everything is fine. I'm going to my IntelliJ project from yesterday. I will going to close it, and how can I call this one? So Spring Security roles authorities. Java 17, but that doesn't affect us anyhow. I'm writing a web application. I'm using Spring Security. I'm using MySQL to get the data from my database, so I need a driver. And for simplicity, I will use Spring Data JPA, although you could connect to your database in any way you'd like. And I'm not sure, but probably I will make a use of Lombok to simplify my my code to avoid writing the getters and the setters and the constructors. And if I'm right, that should be it. So let me press the create button, and for some reason it opened on the other screen, but that's not a problem because I can take it here. I'm going to close this other project that we don't need anymore, and I'm going to actually start working on it. So what do we need to do? Wait a bit till we have everything indexed. So let's wait a bit. Let's wait until IntelliJ does everything it needs, and now you can see it's indexed. And then of course I will create a very simple controller, because maybe we would like to prove at the end that it's working fine. So new package, still importing something there. This IntelliJ always eats all my RAM and resources when I'm using it. So new package controllers, and just a very simple demo controller. Okay, REST controller, public string demo. Okay, and it's kind of irrelevant what this endpoint does. And if you'd like, we can like add some pre-authorization here and say has authority read. So you say you either have authority read or has role admin. Okay, just to prove that you can have both of them at the same time, and you can literally add conditions on both roles and authorities if you want that. Okay, because that was the question, that was what we demonstrate. But to everything to work fine, we will need to add the configs. So let's add a config package and the so-called security config class, the way I like to name it, and it's a configuration class. So if you're in a Spring Boot app, I need to add a configuration annotation, and because I used pre-authorize, I need to enable global method security with pre-post enabled true. And then I'm just going to add the filter chain, security filter chain, HTTP security. So guys, if you don't understand what I'm doing here, mind that this is because I consider you already know some things, and if you don't know that, what you can do is watch the Spring Security Fundamentals playlist, and you can get that from the Spring Security Fundamentals playlist. So what I recommend you is, if you don't understand what I'm doing here, maybe you don't know what HTTP security is, or the security filter chain, or the enable global method security annotation, then this is not part of the Spring Security series, and that's why I consider you already know some stuff. Let's say you already know some stuff, and in case you don't know that stuff, you can still get it free. You can still find it free on this YouTube channel. So just make use of this channel, find the Spring Security playlist, and use it. Okay, otherwise, if you know what it is, then you might know that what I'm going to do here is set the HTTP basic authentication method, and then I'm going to say and authorize requests, and I want any request to be authenticated, and then I want to simply build and return the result. And of course I'm going to throw the exception. What else will I need? So I'm definitely going to need a password encoder. And then the bean return, and I'm going to use the no password encoder in this case because I stored the credentials in plain text, but remember, it's striked out for a reason. You should never use the no password encoder, and you should always you should always hash your passwords, so that's why it's straight out. So this is only for demonstration purposes. Can you please do a video on implementing Spring Security on microservices? What is different in using Spring Security in microservices? Because I don't know. So I could do, but wouldn't it look like the same? I mean, what would it be different if I use Spring Security in a microservice versus a service versus a monolith application? Nothing is different, honestly. So sorry, guys, I don't understand this question. If you want to rephrase it somehow, I would be glad to answer it, but in my perspective, Spring Security is just a framework to apply application level security. So whether you are on a microservices environment or on a monolithic one, you will still apply it in the same way. I hope that answers your question. Now, with that being said, I have the data in the database. So what is the next step? Well, the next step should be creating the entities. So I will just create an entity table, and then I will create the user entity, and then I will create the authority entity as well. So say it's an entity, and then I need to specify explicitly the table name, because if I remember correctly, I have used users, which is different from user, and if I don't specify the name, it will not properly map, and then it will fail with an exception. And authority, and the same I will have to do with authority. So going back here, okay, let's first actually define the user bean. Oops. Okay, so this is the ID and the generated value, strategy identity, although it's not really important here because we will not create any user. String username, and then string password, and then getters and setters. And I'm using Lombok to define the getters and the setters. And then I have authorities. So I define the authority entity, same here, it's an entity. The table name is authorities, and then private int ID, private string name. Let me check that I called it name in the database as well, because otherwise it won't work. So authorities name, and we have also a role, of course, so we need to know if it's a role or not. So I will try to map this to a boolean, and then this is the ID, and again I made it generated value strategy identity. And then getters and setters. Okay, so if you have 3 microservices A, B, and C, would you implement it separately or as a service? This question is actually an architectural one, and I think I might have answered it in the software architecture fundamentals series I have on this channel. So it's not related to Spring Security. It's related to the architectural decision of implementing, for example, the security only at the gateway level, or at the infrastructure level, or at the application level on every service. I do recommend you follow my software architecture fundamentals series to learn more about that. Getter, setter. Okay, so we have the getter and the setter, and now we also need to make, so we have the user and say private set of authorities, and we have a many-to-many relationship, and the join table is called users underscore authorities, and then I have the join column with its name user ID, and I have the inverse join column, with its name authority ID, if I correctly remember, going back to make sure in the database. So user ID, authority ID, fine enough. Okay, in the authority you can also say here if you want, so it's mapped by, I think it's enough to put it in the user, isn't it? Because we just can take it, so one way around should be enough. So let's try it like this without specifying it in the other one. So we have the table, and we have the set of authorities. Anyway, I'm not sure. Let's actually try in the bidirectional one just to make sure we have it if we need it. I'm not sure if we will need this side of the relationship. It's not clear for me now, but I don't think it hurts if we add it. So many-to-many, and then we need to specify here that's mapped by the authorities, and then getter and setter we already have, and that should be it. Next step, repositories. So let's create a repository. The repository, new user repository, and this is actually an interface, and it needs to extend JPA repository. Of course, it can extend CRUD repository, it can even extend the repository, and that's it. But I will simply make use of JPA repository because it's simple, and I will say this is for the class user, and it uses integer as the primary key. Need to make sure that we import the correct entity. And I saw some discussion about JPA repository because it provides this ugly find all methods. Sometimes can be nasty because it can draw into errors, but I still like using it. I mean, nobody forces me to use find all. Indeed, using find all is not a good practice because you rarely want to literally get all the the records of a specific table. So these methods, well, they shouldn't exist, should they? I mean, it just for you can only use them in demonstrations and in theoretical examples, but and avoid using them in real world apps. They shouldn't be used in real world apps. Anyway, in my case here, I will just say optional of user. Oh, no, that's not what I wanted to say. I will just want to say optional of user, find user by username. And remember, another thing that I always do is that even though theoretically Spring Data can translate the name of the method in a query, I usually like to use the query and define it myself. So that's what I'm doing here, is select from user where username is, and then say the name of the parameter. So I do it like this, and now this will help me creating the service. So in the service I can create my JPA user detail service, if you allow me call it like this, where I will use the service annotation to make it a bin in the context, and where I will inject my user repository and use the allargs constructor to define the constructor through which the injection will be done by Spring. Of course, this is meant to be a user details service, so I need to implement the user details service contract, and that forces me, of course, to override the load user by username method, which needs to provide the user details. Okay, so that will not be very difficult, but we will need to create a wrapper out of that. So it takes the username, and this one, as you know, it gets the user from the database as an optional. So we will have something like user isn't or else or something like this. So I can simply just map it to a user details and then say or else throw a new username not found exception, something like that. Okay, but we need to map it to something that is a user details, and we have the easiest option that we would have is creating a wrapper over it. So let's just create here in the app package security, and we define here the security user, which will be an adapter. Actually, it will adapt my entity user to user details, so something like this. That's what I want to do. Okay. Okay, and Georgia, tutorials about servlets. No, I don't think I have created. Servlets are quite, I mean, you don't really create them a lot anymore in real world applications, but they are truly behind the scenes of many functionality. It's a good question. I think I will add it on my list and create a tutorial about servlets for the future, because even though you don't create them, they are still relevant, aren't they? So it makes sense to know what a servlet is. But no, I don't think I have already one. So to continue here the explanation, I'm going to define the user that's wrapped. I will make sure that we have a nolargs constructor for this, and then the only thing I'm going to do here is say this one returns the password, This one returns the username, and then this will be the difficult implementation that I will leave it for later. So let me leave it for later. But before I leave it for later, I want to completely map here. So say my user to a new security user. And of course you maybe know that starting with Spring 8, when we have lambdas like this, you can simply, if you have on the left and on the right the same thing, you can just do it, you can just do it like this, okay, which is the same thing. And now you just put the return in front of it. So that should be our user details service. Cool. Now we still have the problem of taking the authorities from the database. So I'm going back to my security user, and here is where I need to return a collection of the type granted authority, and these are, to remind you, authorities and roles. So both of them, authorities and roles, are represented by the granted authority interface. Remember that roles and authorities are different just as concepts, but behind the scenes they are represented by the same thing. Now if I try to take them here from the user, so I could try to do something like this. Var authorities is user get authorities, but if you do something like this, then here you will most likely have an exception that tells you that the session has ended. That most likely happens because the authorities, being a set, they are by default lazy. So you can just check this if you just go here and see the default of the fetch attribute. It's lazy. That's in JPA by default. Collections are lazy, simple fields are eager in terms of the aggregation. So what's the problem with this is that most likely when Spring Security will reach using this method to get the authorities, the session created by Hibernate, which is our JPA implementation behind the scenes here, will most likely have already ended. And because of that, the call to the get authorities method will fail with an exception. I don't recall exactly what was the type of the exception, but it tells you something like a message that sounds like session is closed, you cannot use that session anymore, which makes sense. Like the session can't stay there forever, it stays only for a use. So whenever you will get the authorities, it's already over. So to solve this, you have multiple ways, but the simplest here, because you know that the set of authorities can't be a large one, for a user. You can't have like a very big number of authorities or roles assigned to a user. Then you can simply just use the fetch eager without being afraid that you affect the performance somehow. And if you use the fetch eager, then in the first session the data will already be retrieved and you will not have the closing session problem anymore. So that's how it should look like. And now of course it's still ugly because we don't have a way to represent a role or an authority. So we can just call it security authority, create a class which implements the granted authority interface and use that one. Or you can simply use the simple granted authority class. So you either create your own implementation, because it's very easy. It would look like this. Let me show you. So security which would actually have to like implements granted authority, and then we'll of course need to override the get authority. So you have something like this, or you can use the simple if you don't want to implement a wrapper over it just for the get authority, I think the easiest way is just to use the simple granted authority class, which is an implementation. Let me search it for you. Simple granted authority, here it is. So it's provided by Spring Security, and it does exactly what you saw. So it's actually, it does this. So it's simply implementing, taking a string as a parameter and returning the string. Okay, it's very easy. So you have these two options. You either create your own or you use the simple granted authority. Let's try using the simple granted authority. Where am I here? Back. So in that case, I would just say for var a of the authorities set, I need to create a list of granted authority, which will be my role list or whatever you want to call it. New array list should be enough here, and say role list, and then I need to do something like if a is role, else no. If it's not a role, if it's an authority, then you simply add it. So you create a new simple granted authority with this name. Otherwise, you add it and you prefix it with role underscore, and here is where I add that role in front. And then you just return this list. I'm not sure, ugly, beautiful. This code is maybe not perfect, but I think it does the job. So I think that's basically it, isn't it? Because now you can simply, this is already, it's already a service, so it's already in the context. So theoretically, you already should be able to see, and to prove it, to prove that's fine, let's actually try to do something like var security context holder, sorry, var context security context holder get context get authentication, and we can just add a breakpoint here, and we can see if the authority looks, the authentication object looks fine. Of course, we will need to see if it also passes the pre-authorize. So theoretically, I should be able to pass the pre-authorize with the user that has the read authority. And in my case, the user that has the read authority is user 1, and user 1 is Bill, actually. So Bill, and then I need to also start with Postman. Okay, here I am. Let's wait a bit for the application to start. Oh, I didn't specify the connection to the database. Sorry, my fault. So Spring data source URL JDBC MySQL localhost, and the name of the database was demo, and then username. In my case, I simply have root without the password, so these two should work. So, oh, no, I started without the debugger. Okay, let me actually close it and start it again to have the debugger as well. And let's wait a few seconds for our application to start, give it a second chance, and then I will try to call the demo endpoint using Postman, and I will try to authenticate with Bill, and hopefully if we didn't implement something wrong, the application should stop on this breakpoint on line 16. So demo Bill 12345 401 unauthorized. Funny. So it looks like it's working, but for some reason it doesn't enter here. Let's comment out the pre-authorize. Or it was a 401 unauthenticated actually. So unauthenticated means it doesn't 401 unauthorized, it means it didn't authenticate at all. So it's quite strange, isn't it? Where was my Postman? Okay, so it's an authentication problem. Funny. Okay, no problem, guys. We always have possibility to debug our application. So in case I have a lack of authentication, what would I actually do is firstly go here on the load user by username and see if everything comes fine. It's practically trying to figure out why exactly my user is not found, isn't it? So let's try to do this. Just adding it, and we can see that indeed now it stopped on line 19 because that's what we expected. We verified the username is Bill, so it kind of makes sense, and we can see that the optional that has been retrieved is also it also looks good. I mean, it's an optional containing, where is it? We can see it here somewhere. Containing a value, so value and the password looks good as well. Moreover, we also have the two authorities, right? Oh, and that's it. So, write and read. No, it's write and read, so it should be fine. Okay, so it has the read authority. That means we should be able to see it. And then theoretically our security user is okay as well. So maybe it's a problem with the way we define the authorities. Can that be the case? Because it seems that at least from up to this point of view it looks fine. So it entered Spring Security. Spring Security found the user, so it should not cause a problem. That at least should not cause a problem. So what else can be wrong? So if that's the case, maybe I will try to add here and see if we didn't like do something wrong in this case. Okay, but it doesn't even enter, so what is wrong actually? Password encoder is good because we don't have the password encrypted. Okay, if that's the case, we can even debug further. So what should we do? We should go to the basic authentication filter. And in the basic authentication filter, if you followed my my lessons, you know that the do filter internal should be the first one to happen here. So let me actually try to restart the application and see what happens in the authentication logic. Something looks to be really wrong in here for some reason, and since we don't have any exception, it's quite difficult. But since we know where to put a breakpoint, we can anytime debug for that. So go. So we have it here. Okay, you see the request. The username is found and its Bill is the correct one. Okay, from the database, fine. And then it tries to authenticate. It enters, of course, that's expected. It enters the load user by username. which we already know it works fine. Going back here, so theoretically in the authentication manager here we can have problems. DAO provider manager, the result should be added to the security context. So my expectation is it either goes to the authentication exception or it goes to line 79. And it goes to an authentication exception for some reason. So we can understand why it's not working, but we still don't know exactly why. So the only thing that we know is that it's failing on this line, so somewhere in the authentication manager. So I would really like to see exactly what's failing. So let me always try to use only one debug breakpoint at a time. So when you debug, that's one of the advices you will also find in my latest book. And then I'm going to go into this, and maybe retrieval of the user should not cause problems. Let me see if the authentication in the provider manager works fine. So not even. Okay, try one again, once more and see. Okay. Retrieve user returned null. Isn't that strange? I mean, didn't we see that it actually works, and now it says it returns null for some reason? What am I doing wrong here? I'm definitely screwing up something, but I can't figure out why. So the security filter chain looks to be fine. I enable the configuration, I have the password encoder, user details looks fine. This seems to return properly. The security user looks fine also. Really strange. Oh damn. Oh god. I know what happens. You see, this is a fault in Spring Security, guys. So it's actually the Spring Security itself. It defines the user details as being the username, password, plus the roles and authorities, which is fine. But it also defines some methods, 4 of them actually, representing if the account is expired, if it's non-locked. So it's basically those attributes that allow you to lock an account, lock a username, stuff like that. But this is a fault. This is basically it shouldn't have been, in my perspective, designed like this. Now, of course, when I overridden them, IntelliJ put all of them on false, and I failed to observe that. So most likely, looking at it now, I didn't finish my debugging, but somewhere in the code it checks for this method, and because the methods were on false, the account wasn't basically enabled, so the authentication fails. Now, theoretically, in my perspective, from an architectural point of view, this shouldn't be like this. I mean, it doesn't fulfill an important principle from Solid, which is called interface segregation. So some of you, and if you don't know what Solid principles are, I recommend you find that video that explains it in my channel. When you have any kind of an interface, you should allow an object to implement only the part of the contract that's needed. And for example, in most cases, you might not even need this for. So in my perspective, they could have been successfully moved to another interface. Now, because I failed to observe them, because I was more focused on the implementation, I failed to see that they were overwritten and the value was false for all of them, making my users disabled all the time. So that's not okay. So that's basically why it was failing. That I was just too eager to find out the complex situation, what I actually did wrong, really wrong, and that why it's failing, why my authentication fails, which was not the case. Basically, I did implement everything correctly. I just forgot to make my users enabled, you know. But anyway, you saw some nice debugging on Spring Security, which is what I do when I can't figure out what I did wrong. Although this simple example shouldn't have missed it. Okay, so I was now going back here. I should be able to call the endpoint now. Okay, fine. Now, oh no, it's still have some breakpoints. Sorry for that. I will take them out. And finally, you observe it happens what we expected. So you see, it gets on in the method. I will put back then the pre-authorize, but first of all, let's take a look and see how the authentication looks like. So you can see that the principal, our user, so we have principal username Bill, looks fine, and then you have the two authorities, read and write. So that's what happens because I used user Bill, and if I will use user John, say I'm using John instead here, okay, you see that it has authority read and role client. So that's basically what we wanted. So we wanted to have the possibility for our users to have both authorities and roles and store them in the database. So now we can say we proved this is possible. Okay, so we can, this one has the authority read and role client. So how can we add a condition to prove something in our case? We can say if it has the authority write or it has the role admin, then you can get into this. And then we create a different endpoint test where we say if it has if it has any of the roles client or admin, then you can access test. So this way, theoretically, this one should be accessible by Bill, because Bill, if I correctly remember, has the authority right, although they don't have any role, while this one should be accessible by John, because John doesn't have any authority, but they have the read authority, but they also have the role client. Yeah, that was it. So anyway, we can still keep our breakpoints here and restart the application, and then we test both of the methods to make sure that indeed our implementation works as we expect it to work. Okay, fine, here it is. So demo can be accessed by Bill, and then we see it stopped in the breakpoint because Bill has the authority write, so they can access this. They don't have the role admin, but they have an authority that allows them to enter. Fine. But if I try to call it with John, then it's a 403 forbidden because John doesn't have any authority, which is fine. At the same time, John should be able to call the other endpoint test, and it happens. You see, it's stopped in the test, and we can check here that indeed John has one of the roles. So that's why the authorization rule allowed John to step into the method, because it fulfills the rule. It has any of the roles client and admin. It has actually the role client. Okay, and here is the way you took it from the database. But what actually pre-authorize works with is the one here, which is prefixed with role underscore. Okay, but at the same time, if you have the user Bill, they should get a 403 because they don't have either of the roles client or admin. So our application works fine, and you will have it on my GitHub. I hope that you understood this example in detail, and I hope that you will find it useful. Again, I just wanted to prove, first of all, to answer the question, and then to prove that you can technically have both roles and authorities. I still stick on what I said earlier. Be very careful, because it might create confusion if you use both of them in the same application. We also proved that roles and authorities are both of them represented by the same granted authority contract. The only thing that is different technically for the role is that you have to prefix it with role underscore, but that's everything. And of course, it's different of the concept because the role is a badge while the authority is an action. If the example was fine, and I hope it is, hopefully it will help you. If you still have questions and you didn't have the chance to leave them in the chat now, remember that you can always leave them in the comment section later, and I do advise you find me on Twitter and LinkedIn, and we can discuss there as well. With that being said, our time for today is